My name is Manny. Happy Sunday. How are we feeling? Good. Nice Sunday activity. Excuse the face. I got into a terrible bar brawl last night, but I won.
Good.
I fell off my bike.
In your bar?
No, in a different bar. Yeah, I wouldn't fight. I try not to fight my own. This is so cool for me because I've known David now more than 3 years. He's helped me through a lot, as I think we all can attest. He is a giver. He is a community leader, and very multi-talented, as we will learn. I remember when he was telling me about this project in the midst of it. And I thought, what a wonderful idea. And I don't think any of us could have expected just how amazing the reception has been. I mean, it's just really blown up, selling out everywhere. And I'm just really excited to learn more about the book and get into it. I'm really honored that John King is here from the Chronicle. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Manny's is a civic and political event and gathering space. We host all sorts of things: arts and culture, politics, social justice, and community events. And so welcome to our home. I hope you feel comfortable. I will be at the door with champagne if you need a top up. And I think that's it. Anything else, David?
No.
And to all those on Zoom, welcome. If you need anything, type it in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat haphazardly. So I think without further ado, I'll give the mic back to David and say thank you for choosing us for this special event.
Very cool. Thank you, Manny. Please, everyone, give Manny a round. I remember when I met Manny several years ago, I said, he reminds me of the people that were my age, which is his age, in 1986 when I moved here, and the activism that came out of AIDS, HIV years, and the early LGBT years. I was a member of Queer Nation and ACT UP, and I remember thinking sometimes when I would lose faith in San Francisco still being that shining city on the hill and a model for all kinds of people, certainly in my case, LGBTQ people, that Manny gave me hope. And Manny's is a really special place, and I'm really greatly honored to be here, Manny. It means a lot to me, and what you have done for the community really can't be measured. So please give Manny and his incredible staff a round of applause. It's a free live stream. Always go to welcome to Mannys.com. Incredible events here throughout the year. Book signings during the presidential campaign. We do not pretend to be nonpartisan here. More than, was it 15 presidential candidates for the Democratic nomination came here? 17. Manny hosted the first ever drive-in presidential debate. Was covered around the world. So this is a special place. So
just you're promoting Manny's as well as your book.
There you go. Well, I mean, I am his publicist, so there's a little bit of a well, first of all, real quick, we're going to get into this right away. Our very special guest, my longtime friend and colleague, John King. Many of you know and read him in the San Francisco Chronicle. I remember the first time I met him, and the first time we really talked, I don't even know if John remembers this, was at the funeral for Herb Cain at Grace Cathedral. And at the time, we were handling media and public relations for Grace Cathedral, also a very affirming LGBT space, which is unusual for a Christian church. And I came out, and John was there, but I remember kind of teary-eyed, and the place was packed with people to pay tribute to Herb Cain, really, truly one of our journalistic legends. And John looked out and went, all this for a writer. And that's when I knew that John had the heart of a poet as well to a reporter. So I'm now going to turn it over to him, two-time Pulitzer Prize nominee, John King, who I'm very honored to have interviewed me today about my book, Upon This Rock. John?
This is definitely first public, not first public appearances and outside of the living room, but first public appearance in terms of the 4 people. And having done as few Zoom things as I could during the last 19 months, it's nice to be back talking to people in front of people. I like what David mentioned. I had forgotten about that, but it was a very good event. And what was striking, actually, the story I did there was not just that the cathedral was packed, but the Huntington Park across the way itself was full of people who were there to watch the broadcast and all. So it's a reminder of just how far words can spread and different directions in different ways. But with David, whose book kind of does that in the way that it goes from I was going to say the outskirts of Rome, but probably that's not how Orvieto thinks of itself. Goes from Italy to San Francisco and back again several times. It's just kind of fun to have the chance, especially during the last 18 months or so, whatever it did for book sales and book promotion, it certainly, the novel became a bit of an outlet. And David sent me a copy, or offered to send me a copy, which was very flattering. And I kind of told him that I don't really read fiction, so I wasn't a good person to squander a copy on. But he did send it along, and I found myself enjoying it enormously, partly for just the vicarious getting out of the Bay Area during the pandemic, but also just for an incredibly multi-layered thriller that managed to be kind of a story about a couple, 100 crash courses in different aspects of Italy and the Catholic Church and aspects of Italian culture. And then also a very intricate mystery thriller going in all sorts of directions, some of which I kind of saw coming and some of which totally caught me by surprise, which is the mark of a good book, that you're kind of thinking you figure it out enough so you feel a little confident, and you keep getting knocked off your confidence, which makes you more determined to keep going and unravel that mystery. So it really was a lot of fun as a book, and it's kind of fun now just to have the chance to talk with the author. And one of the first things I just want to start with is that, with the exception of me, it's kind of the idea is that every journalist has a novelist in them. They want to print the newspaper and write their novel. So I don't know if that's true of the public relations business as well, or if you and your husband Alfredo were in Orvieto and suddenly it's like, I want to write a book about this place and then I need to figure out the plot.
Yeah, well, thank you, John. To kind of paraphrase John F. Kennedy after Marilyn Monroe sang him "Happy Birthday" at Madison Square Gardens in that kind of sultry way, I can now retire from politics after an intro like that. Well, it's funny. I got into public relations accidentally. I started as a writer. I wrote for The Advocate, American Theater back in my 20s, and soon realized, as we all know, that writing doesn't usually pay a lot. And I got offered a job in public relations and started writing press releases. And in my 20s, I started a book that still is in a drawer and actually on a computer drive about the AIDS era. I started it when I was a catering waiter in DC for Glorious Food. And I remember, I think the reason I didn't finish, I know it sounds dramatic, but there are a lot of people here who lived through the AIDS era. I remember thinking, if I finish it, I'm going to die. And I left it 3 chapters short of finishing it. And now
Was it a novel?
it's a novel. It's called The Man in the Circle. It centers around DuPont Circle, and it takes place during the final term of a conservative American president. And the juxtaposition of this, not well-paid, not well-known catering waiter, gay, who keeps somehow finding himself in the halls of power up against the president of the United States during the AIDS era. And actually, now that this book has come out, I believe actually that I'll be able to finish this one, because I want to write about that character. His name is Adam Ferris, 40 years later. So the first 3/4 of the book is this character in his 20s in the midst of one pandemic, and now with the perspective of 40 years later coming out of another pandemic. So that's my long-winded way of saying I had a novel in my brain for many, many years. This book came out of the very short version of the story is my husband Alfredo and I lost our 4 best friends in less than a year. We were their caregivers. These were wonderful men. Reverend Anthony Turney from Grace Cathedral, first openly gay deacon, executive director of the Names Project, Bishop Otis Charles, the first openly gay bishop of any denomination, Anglican Church, and his husband Felipe, and our friend Tom Dross. And also during that time, the notorious Lynn Spalding case that many of you know about, the woman who died in San Francisco General Hospital. It was a rough year, I guess is my point. And as our friend Anthony, the last of that group to die, was in hospice at coming home, Alfredo and I received an email from a friend in New York saying, hi, do you know anyone who would like to do a house swap? My husband and I have a little apartment in Italy and we're looking for a place in San Francisco. And that all came pouring out. And he said, well, don't you want to know where it is? I said, no, small town Italy. Sounds great. So we turned over our public relations business to a colleague. And for the first time in my life, I had 4 months off the grid. And we arrived in Orvieto sight unseen. And we arrived on November 30th, 2014, a few months after our friend Anthony died. And we arrived on the anniversary, true story, the 4-year anniversary of the suicide of a young deacon, this man whose real name is Lucas Sedeta. The book is dedicated to him. And he was a week away from ordination. And the Vatican denied him the priesthood on the rumor that he was gay. And he was so distraught, he threw himself from the cliffs. It still gets me upset to think about it, because when I was young, I very seriously considered the priesthood, as many people who then end up coming out as gay and saying, that's not for me. But his story really moved me and angered me. And the more I learned about the real story, the more I became obsessed. And 2 weeks later, the whole idea for a novel just dropped into my brain. And I wrote the first 60% of the novel in those first 3.5 months, and then finished it over the next few years.
And it's fascinating hearing how this comes about, because it does get in. There is a character in the book whose ashes you are taking to Italy, and that's one of the 4, or kind of a compilation?
That's one of the 4. Our friend Anthony Turney, when he was my mentor, I met him in 1984, my first job in college at the National Endowment for the Arts, which only for a little bit more is the Trump International Hotel. Soon that name will be wiped off of it. Yeah. But that was where I had my first job, and Anthony was the deputy chairman of the NEA. And he was very close with us. He lived with my husband Alfredo and I for the last 3 years of his life with cancer. And when he died, he said, I want my ashes scattered in Glastonbury, which is this mythical place in England. So we literally carried his ashes with us around the world. So that is also based in Trek. The Reverend Brian Swathmore is based very much on a compilation of Anthony Turney and Otis Charles.
And it's interesting hearing this, because the way the book is written, there's such a knowledge of the city or the town or whatever, Orvieto, and it's such a character in the book that I would have thought it kind of came around in a different way. So I've asked throughout this for David to read just real brief excerpts from the book to give you an idea of the writing style when it doesn't include a for more information, contact David Perry with the email and the, I don't know, phone numbers you can put on things anymore.
Yeah.
But so where it's marked.
Got it.
So this is the town where anyone who reads the book gets to just hang out for a few hours.
So starting with for the first 15 minutes. For the first 15 minutes, the Corso was all business, a mixture of small family-owned shops, tobacco stands, delicatessens, trattorias, bars, and wine shops, along with the more than occasional European fashion brands. Orvieto may be medieval, but it catered to the vacation trade. Lee was surprised, but grateful not to see a Starbucks. Everything was Italian here. They certainly know how to preserve their culture, Lee said. Well, they've been doing it for 3,000 years, Adriana replied. They've become good at it. About 20 minutes into their stroll, the Corso abandoned its touristy veneer and became more subdued. Instead of stalls selling bottles of Orvieto Classico bunched in packs of 3 for easy shipping overseas, the side streets gave way to small chapels, neighborhood butcher shops, barbers, florists, small hardware stores, and bars clearly meant for locals. Half an hour after they set out, they were at the end of the Corso and the eastern edge of Orvieto's daunting cliff face. Directly in front of them, punctuated the terminus of the Corso, was a 20-foot-high iron sculpture of a chalice, crowned with a huge oval host radiating a halo of golden rays, the official monument to the Eucharistic miracle of Bolsena in 1263. Well, no question about this being a Catholic town, Adriano said, shaking his head. You can't miss that.
And as I think that gives you a taste, the book has a lot of, it's very atmospheric, but then also there is a lot of, as I mentioned before, a lot of papal history, a lot of Italian history, a lot of very fine-grained history. You were saying you wrote 60% of the book. Did you keep folding more of the history in, or Alfredo would know, are you just an encyclopedia of Italian?
No, not at all. It's funny, before this trip, I mean, I worked aboard ship for 2 years, worked my way around the world, editing the newspaper on a cruise ship, 65 countries. And if you had asked me before this trip, which would be the least likely country for Alfredo and I to spend a month, we'd have said Italy. But if we love Rome, we're like, Italy, I just don't get it. I don't get it. Now, of course, well, we're Italy. We got there, and as I said, I was off the grid. No email, nothing. I spent a lot of time in the library of Orvieto. I did go online, but only to research books. I subscribed to several medieval tomes there, because the other part of the book that I think you're referring to is the other thing we found out about Orvieto, besides that it was the site of this terrible suicide, was it was in Orvieto where the Pope was when Henry VIII applied to divorce Anne Boleyn. And so literally,
Catherine of Aragon.
I'm sorry, Catherine of Aragon to marry Anne Boleyn. Thank you. Alfredo keeps me honest in more ways than one. And it suddenly struck me that this conflict between the churches had literally happened upon this rock, separated by 500 years. So the mystery that is at the forefront of the novel takes place in 2013, over a period of 6 weeks. But then the solution to the mystery takes place during 1527, during the time of the Medici Pope, Clement VII, who fled to Orvieto. So the thing that I'm proudest of, there is a lot of history. And if you read a date in the book, whether it's World War II, the Renaissance, or the Middle Ages, those dates are accurate. There's even an imagined scene where the Medici Pope sits down with several people. All those people existed, and they were in Orvieto at that time. I don't know whether they had dinner or not, but they could have. And the dialogue for that scene is actually taken from letters of the time that I went back and researched. So I love history, and that in a sense was the most fun for me, was digging that stuff out. So I'm glad it wasn't boring or too much.
No, that's fascinating. So basically, Orvieto pulled you in, the mysteries of the place pulled you in, the history, but also the current aspects. And another actually, I'll jump ahead of the question I was going to ask. I want to talk about the plot just a little bit without spoiler alerts, but another layer of intrigue, if you're a local reader, is there is a good bit of just kind of a San Francisco aura to it, in terms of some of the characters and things. But also, as someone who covered City Hall for several years,
I think I know where this is going.
It was the kind of thing where it's like, wait a second, I think I know that person, that type of thing. And so, I mean, this is not a roman à clef in the sense of retelling the story of Frank Jordan in the shower, to really go back into history. But to what extent is this, well, if I'm going to write a novel, I'm going to have fun with it, and I'm going to put some people in it, and let them be surprised there. But one in particular. Yeah,
one in particular. So it's interesting, having gone to the dark side, having been a journalist and then gone into PR, which they call the dark side, as you know, I had always heard authors tell me, and we represented a number over the years, Michael I here is from our office, and Alfredo, and authors would always say to me when we were publicizing the book, oh, the character spoke to me. And I always remember thinking, that just sounds like such a bunch of pretentious BS. I don't know what to say. But then I had that experience, and I would be trying to tell a story and a character would talk to me. And I knew, at least for me, I shouldn't say I knew, I wanted this book to have kind of a deus ex machina, to use the Greek, play, someone who comes at the beginning of a play and says, this is what's happening. And then the story unrolls. And at the end of the book, this person comes in again, literally in Greek drama, they would drop the person from the stage on a wire and say, and now we solved it. And so the character that fulfills that purpose in this book is a character named Magda Carter. And she works for the San Francisco mayor's office. And she is very mysterious and very powerful. And Lee and Adriano, the young characters, work with her. And Adriano has a soft spot for her, but she scares Lee to death. And many people have hypothesized who she is, to which I always say, she's a fictional character named Magda Carter. Having said that, there is a person that is very close to Alfredo and me, who we know well, who once said to me, knowing I was writing a novel, if you ever write about me, make me tall and blonde with legs up to my nostrils. Because this person is not like that. So Magda Carter is a bombshell. I think, as I say in the book, when she walks in a room, men, women, gay, straight, lesbians, dogs, they just are like, wow, that is sex on heels. So she is quite a powerful character and a powerful woman who does not like being appreciated for her beauty. And she makes the comment several times when people try to use her beauty to get close to her, she cuts them off at the knees.
And I want you to read a little bit about her as well.
So when was the last time Magda had a vacation? Adriano asked, peering over his glasses. Bush was president, the first one, Lee offered drolling. That was 20 years ago, 25. If she took all of her accumulated vacation time, the city and county of San Francisco would go bankrupt. Having survived 5 mayoral administrations in any city was no mean feat. In San Francisco, where politics was blood sport, it was bordering on miraculous. Over 2 decades, Magda Carter, a name that always made me giggle, but never to Magda's face, had made herself indispensable. Mayors came and went, but Magda stayed. Lee was convinced that she knew where Jimmy Hoffa was buried, or maybe not. Adriano called her the real mayor of San Francisco. Her title was as shifting as the fog through the cables of the Golden Gate Bridge, permanent, amorphous, and ever-changing. At the moment, her card read manager of international affairs, but that meant nothing. In reality, she was ambassador without portfolio. She was simply Magda, and her word was law, and her justice implacable. She was Teutonica in stilettos.
And again, that's for the locals, it kind of gets fun in that way. The lead characters in the book, Lee and Adriana, also state the hotel in Byron in Rome. Is that an actual place, or is that a fantasy of the kind of hotel you'd like to?
Yeah, that's so funny. So I'll mention the actual real hotel's name because sadly we were there in August.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, and it was closed because of COVID, one whole stretch of Rome. Rome is going through a rough time, but it'll bounce back, like Città Eterna, the Eternal City. It's based on a real hotel called the Hotel Britannia, and it's in what they call the British Quarter of Rome, near the very first non-Catholic church that was built in Rome. Because up until Rome was independent, papal states said the only churches you have in Rome are Catholic, and they had a Jewish quarter, but in Rome, only Catholic. So the first Protestant church in Rome was built near this place, the Hotel Britannia. It was a former palazzo of the family Orsini, and we stayed there many times. And it is very British. So we nicknamed it the Hotel Byron.
And then, and how many, well, I'm not even going to ask, but one thing that was entertaining for me, and also I admit at times a bit exhausting because I don't read books like this, was the plot had layer upon layer upon layer.
Yeah, I think you said it was layered like lasagna. I think I'm going to put that on my next news release.
Many layers is lasagna.
I got a message that the Zoom connection is not working.
Oh my goodness. Well, we will check with Manny on that in just a second. He'll work on it, but thank you for that. He'll take care of it.
Where is Manny?
Thank you. He'll take care of it, Ron. Don't worry about it. Go ahead, John.
But so how did you start with one plot? Thought, well, if I'm going to write a book, I want to put more than one plot in, or did it just kind of, well, how far can we go with this? Or?
Yeah, it's funny. When I started writing it, like I said, the plot literally just dropped into my brain. And I knew the characters. I knew that I wanted something to happen with this deacon. I knew that Adriano and Lee were going to be working out several mysteries related to the suicide, or was it a suicide? And then when I found out about the whole past history of Clement VII, I knew I wanted to work that in somehow. But I wrote chronologically. Several people asked me, did I have an outline? And I didn't. I wrote chronologically. I did go back and fill in chapters, but I wrote chronologically. And I was about, I'd say, 80% done when I realized the ending changed. I remember Alfredo and I, was our second trip to Orvieto, And we were driving, and all of a sudden I said, "Oh, I just realized how the book ends." He said, "You've been writing it for a year and a half. I thought you knew how it ended." And I said, "I thought I did." And I realized that all the things that I had been writing up to then didn't affect how it ended. We were still unveiling characters and what they thought, because the overall theme of the book is refugees. Everyone in the book, in a sense, is a refugee from somewhere. Adriano is a refugee from a religiously progressive family. Lee is a refugee from a tragic death of his family that I won't reveal, but you need to read the book. Clement VII in the Renaissance is a refugee from the sack of Rome. All the people around Andrea, the deacon, who committed suicide, they're refugees from their own guilt because they feel responsible for his death. So it wasn't until I had revealed all these characters that I said, "Oh, maybe I end the book here," which maybe is where it was more surprising than actually I originally meant it to be. But yeah, I wrote chronologically. I've heard many authors tell me they had pages and pages of notes and have an outline. I wrote chronologically. It was character driven.
So you just started writing at the beginning until you got to the end.
That's true.
And that was a question my wife was thinking about, was just, I mean, on the one hand, you're trying to keep the plot going. On the other hand, you have all these characters who are speaking to you. Did the plot keep kind of getting revised in your mind as you were going forward, and the characters didn't act the way you would act?
Well, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt.
No, that's.
Well, I mean, that's what I meant about having the characters speak to me. And I'd always heard all writers tell me that, and I just thought that sounds so pretentious. How can the characters speak to you? But I was about halfway through it, and I realized it was specifically two characters who weren't doing at all what I wanted them to do in my brain. It's like, well, this is going to make me figuring out the end of this really, strange. So yes, the characters sometimes would not act how I wanted them to act. And a couple of times there were characters who maybe appeared to be one type of person and ended up being another. And that might be my entree for talking about the cover of the book. My publisher, who I really should have mentioned at the very beginning, Pace Press, local and California-based publisher. I had two publishers offer me contracts, and I took the first one that was offered. Not look a gift horse in the mouth. And they came up with several different covers, which were all beautiful, original art. And a dear friend of ours, Rudy Busto, who's a professor of religion at the University of Santa Barbara.
Yes, California, Santa Barbara.
University of California, Santa Barbara. He had been to Orvieto with us, and in the cathedral, there's an incredible set of frescoes by Luca Signorelli, the 16th century artist, so influential that Michelangelo actually came to Orvieto to study Signorelli's frescoes, and it was said that that was the inspiration for the Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel. But one of the scenes is, you see it here, it's called the Preaching of the Antichrist. And for those who are familiar with Christian mythology or legend, it looks like, quote unquote, the classic Jesus. It looks like someone is whispering in Jesus's ear. But in the Bible says, beware of the Antichrist, because the devil can assume a pleasing face. So in reality, the cover is actually the Antichrist, but he looks like Jesus. And it was Rudy, who's the teacher of religious studies, who said, wow, this should be the cover for the book, because no one in the novel is who they appear. So on the book, many people actually had one guy when the book first came out who liked it right away and wanted to become a friend of mine. He belonged to a Christian fundamentalist group. And then I guess he read the review that called it the Gay Da Vinci Code, and he defriended me real quick. Because all he saw was the picture of Jesus on the cover, and he thought this was a religious tone, but it's not.
And so you were talking about the refugee theme. I mean, in a broad sense, are there things you wanted to convey, other than a ripping good yarn and a cool location with suave characters? What do you want to convey with the book?
Well, thank you. That's a good question. I wanted to convey that we can all be redeemed. And I don't mean that as a sense of religious redemption, but we're all humans. And if COVID has taught us anything, God, we all do the best we can, and we just kind of keep on going. And the thing about Orvieto that struck me was it's a small town, and we were there for several months. You kept meeting these characters over and over again. And there were refugees on the street. This was during the 2014, 2015. The refugee crisis, people fleeing in small boats across the Mediterranean to get to Italy, was front page in the news every day. Over 2,500 people died that they know of trying to get from war-torn Libya to mainly Italy, but also Greece during that summer. And on the streets of Orvieto, you would see people, dark-skinned, clearly not quote-unquote Italian, selling socks or sometimes begging. And the reaction sometimes was patient. The reaction other times to people were rude, but you saw them every day. And that was the one surprising character. I did not have a character who was a refugee, who was an Italian in the book, until one day there was this guy, CD seller, and Alfredo and I would see him all the time. And every time we would see him walking down the street, we'd be like, oh God, where's the side street? Because he was relentless. And he would try to sell us CDs. And we would always politely say, no, thank you very much. And I mean, he was just ubiquitous. And one day, I think we're in the middle of lunch, and he came and he said, CDs. And I said, no. And I said it stronger than I meant to. And I remember looking at his face, and he just recoiled. And I was like, oh my God, on my worst day, I'm not a refugee from Libya trying to sell CDs, and you're this white guy just yelled at you. I mean, I felt like crap. It was a moment for me. And I really realized, the whole idea of white privilege, tourist privilege. Here I am walking these streets, and here's this guy who probably has family back in Libya just trying to survive. And I was less than polite to him. So I actually sought him out the next day because he saw me coming. He's like, oh God. And I went up to him and I introduced myself, and I bought some of his CDs, and we became kind of pals. And that's when the idea came to me. To your point, I knew I was writing about characters, but it wasn't until I met him, and in the book, his character is Dawood, that I realized that's the theme. The theme is everyone in this book, old, young, gay, straight, white, black, is a refugee from somewhere. And Orvieto, because it literally is on a rock, has been a place of refuge over the centuries for many different people. And so in a sense, the theme found me.
And so how are the CDs?
They were very interesting. They were very interesting. It wasn't my type of music, but I have to admit that I just found that he worked so hard. And what is interesting is most of the Orovatani, which is what you call some of those Orvieto, were very patient, and they were part of the community. And over the last few years, we've seen several people we regularly see there. At the time, there was a socialist mayor, Giuseppe Germani, who I'm sad to say is no longer mayor. And now there is a conservative mayor from the right wing, was it partly the Forza d'Italia?
Forza Italia.
Forza d'Italia, which is a
Lega Norte.
Lega Norte, which was right wing,
Very right wing.
very right wing. And the immigrants on the street who were not doing anything but trying to sell, there are noticeably fewer of them. And that bothered us when we were in Orvieto the last time.
And while the book is centered on Orvieto, as I mentioned, there are more than one excursions to Rome, but then also there is a hint of just how deeply layered, another set of layers, is the Italian history novel. I have never been to Italy. We're going to go to our first trip, and then there was a pandemic you might have heard about, and we have not been.
But we have places for you to stay now, so yeah.
But so there's also a visit to Civita di Bagnoregio,
Yeah.
and I wanted you to read a little bit of this.
Sure, it's Civita di Bagnoregio is a small town near Orvieto that literally has, depending upon the time of year, 6 to 12 full-time residents. Those are the only people who live there. It's known as the only city in Europe, at least, where you have to pay to get in. It's on a volcanic rock, separated from the rest of the kind of mainland, and you have to walk across a bridge to get to it. And it's charming and remote. It makes Orvieto look like a metropolis. How many gorgeous hilltop towns are there in Italy? Adriano and Lee stood at the edge of the cliffside town of Lubriano, staring across the valley towards their destination, Civitavecchia Reggio, Andrea's hometown. Having successfully helped Don Bello as pinch hitters at the press page 2 days ago, the couple now found themselves at the place of the young deacon's nativity. It's like you shrunk Orvieto, put it in a crystal Christmas tree ornament, and hung it from the sky. My Adriano gave polite applause through gloved hands to his husband. You are waxing poetic today. Well, said Lee with a wave of his hand towards the mist-shrouded hamlet a kilometer distant. Scenery doesn't get much more poetic than that. Like a stage set cued for dramatic effect, the remote and surreal acropolis of Civitavecchia Reggio awaited the sunset. Already the stark canyons surrounding the summit were swathed in shadow, and the few occupied homes were beginning to show candlelight. A brigadoon-like mist nibbled at the rocky base of the town.
Worthy of Rick Steves.
Thank you, that's an inside joke. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
So how often, you wrote 60% of the book just sitting there on your time away from the grid. How many subsequent trips have you made? I mean, was it then 1 month to write 60% of the book and 5 years to plug holes?
Well, two. I mean, so Alfredo and I mean, part of the reason we went to Orvieto for sabbatical together with the death of our friends, but also, again, being completely overtly political, the night that Donald Trump won in 2016, I turned to Alfredo and I says, I'm not going to be a Jew in Weimar. I don't know what is happening to my country, but I want to make sure that if something really happens to this country, we can be with your family who's in Spain. And we started the process of applying for a Spanish passport because by virtue of being married to a Spanish citizen, I could apply. And the first process in that is you become a Spanish resident, which means you claim an address in Spain, we did with Alfredo's parents, but to keep that residency alive, you have to go back to Europe at least every 6 months. So over the period of the next 3 years getting my passport, we would go to Spain and Orvieto, part of the European Union. And we ran our PR business. Michael can tell you, people said they're on vacation. They're like, no, they work California hours. We would, 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Orvieto is 7 a.m. here. So I kept my laptop on California hours. So we actually had a few clients, now they know, they didn't even know we were gone because I was working with a nice class at Orvieto Classico. So we went back 5 times and I did work on the book here, but as Alfredo kept saying to me, the only person you're pushing is you. It's clear that when you're in Orvieto, you're more inspired to write. So I did write on it here in San Francisco, but the first words of the novel were written in Orvieto and the very last words of the novel were written in Orvieto. Somehow just being there, I'm a great believer in the importance of place, and just being there surrounded by all that history certainly impacted the writing for me.
And you mentioned like medieval newsletters and things. I mean, how much of it, and this is, the challenge for any journalist who's trying to reasonably be accurate and thorough, is that you can write 85% of the thing like that, and then you've got to plug in the holes for the next 15%, and that's going down rabbit holes just trying to find, was it May or June of 2017 or 2019 when this or that happened. So how much of that then developed, was that what the San Francisco work could be, was just trying to plug in the...
Absolutely. So yeah, I did write chronologically, but I would keep a list of things and I'd be like, okay, Henry VIII's ambassadors came on this date, and so I had like little digital post-its. And then one day I became kind of obsessed with accuracy. One day we were in Orvieto and we were at this beautiful church. It's the oldest church in Orvieto, San Giovanale. And all of a sudden I said, oh my God, I got to rewrite a chapter. And Alfredo said, what's the matter? And I said, well, in the book, I say that the character sees dawn here. Well, no, this is on the west side of town. You would have seen sunset. Alfredo's like, well, I think you're a little bit obsessive. No one will know. And I said, but I will know, because nothing would make me happier than for people to walk around Orvieto with my book and find this place. And if some of there at San Giovanale, someone will say, oh, it can't be dawn. This is facing west.
Well, they couldn't even read the book because it would be dark.
It would be dark. There you go. So the dates I really was careful about, and that's just me as a historian. Nothing bothers me more than reading historical fiction, which I love, or watching a show like The Borgia, which was great TV and terrible history, or the Medici, which bothers me because no one had straight teeth in the 1500s. And the acting is incredible, but I will see something happen, or I'll see, Cardinal Borgia kill someone, and like, well, that's not the right period. So I was very concerned that when this book gets made into a movie, which I'm determined for it to be optioned for film, that people will see this, and say, yeah, that's right. The history's right.
And that's the kind of thing you could do for 2 hours at night in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Just kind of like chew away, because that's not evoking the place, it's playing the place.
Yeah, it was research, which is, to me, the most fun part is research.
And speaking of which, we certainly did not choreograph this talk. Part of the research also kind of heads up toward a bit more contemporary history. And one of those is when you visit, there we go. When they visit Rome, they go to Vatican City and the papal something or other, where all the people go and watch the Pope come out.
Oh, the Papal Basilica, St. Paul's outside the walls, yeah.
So I said, I haven't been there. But this is the last excerpt I want from the book, is just a quick look at the Swiss Guard. And it
Yes.
continues on to the next.
Yeah, the Swiss Guard are very important to this. Adriana and Lee starting here.
Yes. And then going over.
Yeah. Adriano and Lee looked around. Sure enough, at every door and in every niche were members of one of the world's most famous military units. Go on, I know you're dying to tell me. What's special about the Swiss Guard, Adriano said. Lee perked up. Well, since the late 1400s, the Swiss provided the very best and most talented mercenaries in the world. A lot of European royal families used them for security. Switzerland used to be quite a poor country, and of course, geographically, because the mountains, is quite cut off from the rest of Europe. Certainly it was 500 years ago. Anyway, it was very common for young Swiss boys to hire themselves out as professional soldiers, and they gained quite a reputation for bravery. So much so that the Pope started using them for personal security, starting with Julius II. Adriana shook his head. How do you remember this stuff? I read a lot, said Lee, and I saw the Agony and the Ecstasy 9 times.
But there are a number of film references in there, so I'm guessing that beyond loving Orvieto, you enjoy watching old movies.
I do. Someone said to me, the book has kind of a campy sense of wit, and that made me happy because, nothing against Dan Brown. God knows I wish I had his agent and his sales, so I call him. But to me, sometimes it was so dry and serious. Is that they're all about the end of the world. And I think characters have wit and humor, and Adriana and Lee are a married couple. If anything, I kind of thought of them as the gay Nick and Nora Charles from the Thin Man series. And so they're solving murders, but they took time in between solving murders to have a martini and laugh like human beings. So there are a lot of film references, and there's, I hope, a lot of wit. Several people have said that they laughed out loud at a couple of the descriptions, and that made me really happy.
And so what was it like to, and then we'll also have questions in a few minutes. So what was it like to be working on this book, and how did you steer it toward publication? And then how did you feel when the world decided it wasn't ready to have you come and tell the world about the book because of COVID?
Oh my God, exhausting. People asked me over the time, because we have several friends here who are also writers, they said, how do you get your book published? And I always say, we have to have an agent. They said, well, how do you get an agent? Oh, you get an agent by getting a book published. I don't have an agent. And people asked me how I got the book published. Michael McHale, a dear friend and longtime associate of ours, produced my show on TV for many years, 10%. And he would always book authors. And I was shameless. Every time I would interview an author, I'd say, so who's your agent and who's your publisher? And I used what I call the 3 Ps: persistence, patience, and perkiness. There was not a writer or a publisher that I met that did not get an email from me saying, hi, will you look at my book? It's just persistence. And I got the contract in January. I finished the book in August 2018, the very last word. And I had sent off chapters to 2 publishers who were interested. And in January 2019, I got the contract. And that whole year they edited it. And in January 2020, we chose the cover, and we're going to have a big launch, and all of 2020 is going to be about selling your book. And then this little thing called COVID happened. I was like, wow. And I remember thinking the book's not going to be published. And my publisher said, actually, people are reading. So the book was only delayed by 2 weeks. It came out in September 2020, but I didn't do any, I did some virtual events, but this is the first live event. And then we sent it around to writers, and he said, do you have any writers who you know might give it, an advanced plug? I said, well, Armistead Maupin and Fenton Johnson. And they said, can you get to them? And I said, well, yeah, they're friends. And I said, but you have to know, these are very serious writers. If they don't like it, they will probably just say, David, I love you, but I can't review it. So in March of 2020, when the worst of COVID had just happened, Alfredo and I got a FaceTime from Armistead in London. And he said, I've got your review. Okay. And he read it, and I started crying. And that was the beginning of what I realized, well, okay, I guess I'm not the only person that likes the book.
And that is an elegant, twisty thriller.
Yes, and the rest of it is David Eugene Perry's Upon This Rock will probably do for Orvieto what Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil did for Savannah. And then Fenton Johnson gave my favorite one. He said, the Gay Da Vinci Code, but a lot better.
Both of which they helped plug the thing.
They did. Bless you both, Fenton and Armistead.
And so what was it like? Tell us about your trip to Orvieto not last year, earlier than time itself is
I know.
so hard to track these days. Tell us about your trip to Orvieto and what it was like seeing this.
Well, and I actually, please, I want to take a moment, what do they call it in the Congress, personal privilege. I want to thank my husband, Alfredo Casuso. Please give him a round of applause. I love you for standing in front of my camera. He'll fix it again, so that'll work. He'll fix it. There you go. So Alfredo put up with me patiently writing this book for several years, but also didn't even read it until it was done. People kept asking Alfredo, what's the book like? What's the book like? He said, David won't let me read it. And so then in August of 2018, I was at a cafe in Orvieto, and I texted him. He was at home, and I said, it's finished. He said, what do you mean it's finished? I said, the book's finished. I said, you can read it. He was like, oh, Jesus Christ. I mean, what responsibility? Yeah. And I knew that he would tell me the truth. He would either say it's terrible or, David, this was a nice idea, but move on, stay in public relations. So we kept coming back to Orvieto. We were supposed to come back last year, but of course, COVID. So we kept extending our trip. And then when vaccines allowed, we went in August. And I got to Orvieto, and there was my book. And people were talking about it. And what was interesting is the Italians there loved it. Some of the American and British expats there thought it was a little racy. That was the interesting thing to me. They were like, well, one of them said, who shall go nameless, well, it's a little gay. And I said, well, let's see, the two main characters are husbands, and there's a bisexual Swiss guard, and actually the rest of the people are heterosexual. So I don't consider it a gay book, I consider it a novel, but I found it interesting that one of our gay friends said it was a little gay. But the Italians loved it, and it did cause a stir. And someone asked me the other day, has the church responded? And I said, no, but my hope is, having been raised Catholic and wanting to be a priest at one point, I'm hoping it gets banned by the Vatican. Because that would be the absolute best possible PR. Orvieto, I'm pleased to say, was the same. I'm in the middle, actually, of writing a travel piece that hopefully the New York Times or maybe the Chronicle will pick up on Orvieto, because the big season in Orvieto is during Christmas. They have the Umbria Jazz Festival, and Christmas and the holidays in Orvieto are beautiful. And of course, they haven't had one for 2 years. So my hope is that Orvieto, like so many small towns everywhere, but especially in Europe, Italy, and Spain, has suffered a lot, lack of tourism. So my hope is that my book will actually bring some people back to Orvieto.
And if everyone in this room gets the book, reads the book, gets tickets to head off to Italy and strolls through Orvieto, are the various cafes and all you've mentioned specifically in there, or just they'll walk in and think,
Oh, no,
I
no,
know
no,
this.
they are. I will be happy to tell people the churches are all the actual names in the book, but not knowing how people respond, I fictionalized the names of the cafes that I wrote in. But now they all know. There's one character in the book whose name is Marco. And I would say of all the characters, he's the most like the real person whose name is Carlo. And his restaurant is called De Carlo, Carlo's place. And we got to Orvieto. And again, I wasn't sure how people would react because the book was a bit gay. And I walked into Carlo's place for the first time. And Carlo comes out and says, David, Alfredo, amici, so good to see you. USA, I love you. And I said, Carlo, it's great to see you. He says, no. And he held up a copy of the book. He says, my name is Marco. he had recognized himself in the book. So, Orvieto knows the book is there. And the cafes now have little signs that say, as seen and upon this rock. So.
I want to hand off to you in the audience who might have questions for David about anything, so we will start right here.
So David, how has this book and the whole experience of publishing it changed you?
Thank you. So this is Lupita. Everyone give a round of applause to our friends on the board today. Wonderful journalist, Spanish and English. Thank you, Lupita. How it's changed me. Well, it's made me realize that I don't want to do public relations forever. I want to write books. It also made me realize the extreme privilege of being a white American.
How so?
Well, I think tourism is incredible. I love seeing people travel, and I think it was Mark Twain who said, travel is the surest cure for an end to bigotry. So I forget the exact quote. So I've always been very big on traveling. And you don't have to spend a lot of money to travel. And Italy is not expensive. Once you get there, you can find a cheap place to stay. I think how it's changed me is I've realized how privileged United States citizens are, and all of North Americans. That we land in a country and we wear T-shirts with American flags. Nothing against the American flag. I'm proud to be a U.S. citizen, also proud to be a Spanish citizen. But I think U.S. tourists just think they're going to land in any country and there's going to be a Starbucks or everyone's going to speak English or whatnot. And I guess I always knew that because I've traveled since I was young. But it really has made me realize how absolutely privileged U.S. citizens are. And we need to understand that. And I think if one thing came out of COVID, for one brief moment, the whole world, I call it the Twitter pandemic, we all were sharing something that scared the dickens out of all of us, I think. So I think it made me realize that. As far as changed me, just over, I guess.
Other questions? No other frustrated writers there? Oh, here's one.
Yes. Hi, Rita Haroni, dear friend.
You mentioned wanting to see this as a movie. I'd like to hear more about.
Oh, thank you for that shameless plug. So, the book is legitimately a bestseller now, which gets defined in different ways. It's the best-selling book ever for my publisher. It's doing very well on Amazon, and you can get it in Target. It's even available in Target. We prefer people to go into your bookstore. It's at Books Inc. here in the city. Fabuloso, which used to be Dog-Eared Books of the Castro. It's available anywhere around the country. If you don't see it on the shelf, you can go in and order it. So I prefer people to go into your local bookstore and say, please order it, but you can get it online. I have been told, and when I was writing it, I thought it would look good on the big screen, or specifically as a Netflix series. So at the moment, it is actually being adapted for a screenplay on spec, but then you go through the laborious process of getting someone who's interested to say, I will pay you to have the privilege of producing it. My number one goal for the next year is to get an option for a film or for Netflix. And I've been told by several people in the industry that it would be great for a Netflix or a film because it's basically in one spot, Orvieto. So, movies is all about money. You come to Orvieto, you can film the whole thing in Orvieto. There's a couple of scenes in Rome or Civitate Vagareggio, which is very close, and one scene elsewhere, which I won't mention because I'll give away the end of the book. But you could do the whole film. You could film basically in 2 months in Orvieto.
Who's gonna play you?
That was so
So Daryl Foreman, give a hand, another author here, incredible book, The 11th Truth. Many, many other wonderful books and writings and essays, funniest person I know. No one's going to play me because it's a fictional character. There have been several people who have mentioned that the character of, when I wrote the character of Magda Carter, who's this very tall, slinky, a sexy woman, even though she's blonde, when I was writing her, I had the image of Lucy Liu. Because to me, Lucy Liu is played from these wonderful characters, when she just walks in a room, you're like, I'm a Kenzie Six, I'm a complete homosexual. But when I see Lucy Liu and Charlie's Angels, I'm like, boy, that woman is seriously sexy. So I thought of Lucy Liu, and then even though he's dead, there is a very notoriously dark Bishop Arnaud in the book. And when I was writing him, I saw Alan Rickman. Someone like that. And then there's the gossipy blogger in the book, Lady Peg, who I don't know how many people know the actress Parker Holland. She was most recently in the Netflix series Hollywood. I think she'd be great. And then this was Alfredo's idea, and he's right, because it is set in Italy. LaDonna Volsini, who's a 93-year-old who has the entire institutional history of the town. She's 93 years old. Why not have Sophia Loren? Because Sophia Loren is 93. Wow. So there's my casting.
You're working on this for the next year. You're all set.
I am.
Well, you say that somewhat facetiously, perhaps, that these are fictional characters, but truly, to what degree are the Adriano and Lee reflections of your dynamics in your relationship with Alfredo, or to not at all?
To start, the character who's not David Perry is 29 years old.
Thank you very much. He turns 30 on the first day of the book. Thank you. And Adriano is 27. Adriano, born in Venezuela from Spain. No, I mean, besides they're just both good looking, they have no relation to Alfredo and me. The character of Lee is from Virginia. You write about what you know. I remember once asking Armistead Moffat, well, who are you in the book? And Armistead said, well, they're all me. I mean, and again, I finally understood what he meant by that. Having said that, Adriano and Lee are two characters, are a married couple, and many people who know us say they see some of our dynamic in there. There are two things that I do want to clarify. Well, one I can't reveal because it would reveal the plot of the book, something about Lee. Although I will say this, Lee at one point wanted to become a priest. And at one point in my life, I very seriously studied wanting to be a priest, specifically a monk. Adriano's family are very conservative religious fanatics. And I can assure you, speaking with Alfredo's wonderful parents every day in Santander, they very much are not religious fanatics. So Adriano's parents are not nice people. Alfredo's parents are wonderful. So I do want to put that little rumor to rest.
Yes, in the
I have a question. In the process of having your book published, you mentioned the 3 Ps of perseverance,
Patience and perkiness.
And I venture to guess after seeing you tonight that silent P is politeness. But can you talk about perseverance and talk about how that is? Is there do you pursue also without being a pest?
Oh my God! Well, that's
that balance.
That's this. Well, I mean, I should ask John that question. How many PR people do you have sometimes that every time you see their email or phone number, you go, "Oh God."
More every month.
Yeah, and well, all I can say is maybe I'm not one of those bad people because here sits John King. Well, I guess I'll say that by telling the story. I finished the book in 2018, and one publisher said, I'm really interested in the first several chapters. Send me the whole thing. And it may take me a few months. Or like he said, it may take me 3 months. So I'm like, okay, this is August 18th, September, October, November. I didn't hear anything. Okay, November 19th. Oh, well, we're coming up on Thanksgiving. Maybe I shouldn't send him an email because I don't want to be too pesty. So I waited. And then after Thanksgiving, it's December. And I still hadn't heard anything. And I thought, well, now it's coming up. It's Hanukkah, it's Christmas, it's all this. I don't want to bug him, but oh my God, is my book going to be published? So then this is a true story. First week in January, I guess it was January 6th, Alfredo and I went to the gym and I said, all right, I'm going to write a very short email. Hi, remember me or something like that. And if I don't hear from him, and I came back from the gym and there was an email in my inbox and said, hi, this is Ken Sorsky, Pace Press, and we'd like to offer you a contract. We want to publish your book. So it was, I think part of it's serendipity. I think there is a fine line between over pitching to talk about, just journalism. I know that journalists get probably 150 unsolicited emails a day or something like that. It depends. And, my grandmother who raised me always said, "Hun, you catch more flies with sugar than you do with salt." So I just try to be polite and not be too pushy.
Any other questions? Oh, here we go.
So David,
Paul Pendergast.
knowing you're friends with Armistead, did he have any kind of mentorship aside, any kind of thoughts for you that you wanted to share?
Yeah, well, first of all, Paul Pendergast, who is the smartest marketing person I know around. Thank you very much. Thanks to our dear friend Gwen Kaplan. I met Armistead Maupin in 1986, and of course I was scared to death. And someone said, "Oh, you should call Armistead." I said, "I can't call Armistead Maupin." He said, "Oh, sure, he's listed." And there followed a great friendship, which involved many wonderful dinners and knowing Armistead, a lot of toast. Yeah, that was fun. And the only advice Armistead ever gave me was just keep writing. Just keep writing. And I know it sounds silly, but every day, people who follow me on Facebook know that I write a haiku every day. And to me, that's like practice. It's like, boy, if I can't churn out 17 syllables a day, I'm really pathetic. So every day I write at least 17 syllables, sometimes more. But that's the only advice he ever gave me was write. And also just be your authentic self. And I mean, Armistead is, I think, one of the most gifted writers of any generation. And certainly as an openly gay writer, he provided the shoulders on which the rest of us stand. I mean, there is not a queer writer in the world today, certainly writing in English, who doesn't owe Armistead Maupin a debt of gratitude.
And if there are any more, we've got two stacks of books waiting to disappear, but if there are any wrap-up questions, and if not, oh, no, I thought I saw him. And if not, David, you should head back there and sign books. But first, I want to tell the crowd to give a round of applause to a good one.
I know John works as well, coming out about the history of the San Francisco Ferry Building, correct?
Do I have to keep writing?
You have to keep writing.
Keep writing.
And John is the most gifted writer that I know of the San Francisco Chronicle. He's part of a generation that sadly, I'm afraid, has been disappearing from our journalistic scene. If you really want to read about the soul of San Francisco, specifically as it is reflected in architecture design.
Thank you very much.
Here, here.
Thank you, Manny.